The desert sun burned the skin of every living thing it touched that day, branding the fort and the land around it with a heat that shimmered like polished steel. Dust rose from boot heels and hooves, swirling in the air before settling again in the cracks of the earth. Inside the wooden walls of Fort Henshaw, whispers passed from soldier to soldier like smoke. News that the infamous Colt Maddox, the coyote of Canyon Diablo, had finally been caught. They said he'd once gunned down 4 men in a saloon without spilling his whiskey. Now he sat caged like a beast. The cage stood in the open yard where even the vultures circled lazily overhead, waiting for the end. Colt's shirt clung to his skin with sweat and dust, his hat gone, his wrists chafed from the iron cuffs. He sat cross-legged, his head bowed just enough that the brim of shadow hid his eyes. The soldiers kept their distance. Even chained, something in him made men uneasy, something wild that hadn't yet been broken. It wasn't just his name they feared, it was the silence that followed it. Children dared each other to step close, to poke a stick through the bars and touch the outlaw's boots, but none ever did. They'd seen the way Sergeant Miller's dog wouldn't go near the cage, how it whined and backed off, as if it smelled something worse than death. The fort's preacher said Colt Maddox carried a curse. Others said he carried the devil's patience. Either way, everyone agreed on one thing. He wasn't long for this world. Tomorrow, when the judge rode in, they'd string him up at dawn. As the sun leaned westward, a ripple went through the camp. A small column of dust moved toward the fort gate, and from it emerged a woman riding bareback on a painted horse. Her hair was black as a raven's wing, braided with feathers that caught the dying light. She wore a white deerskin dress marked with red and black beads, her chin lifted, her gaze sharp as the edge of a flint knife. The guards stiffened when they saw her. Apache, a name that made even veterans' hands twitch toward their rifles. The captain came out from his office, brushing cigar ash from his coat. Who in hell let her through? He barked. The sentry swallowed. She asked for parley, sir. Said her name's Naily, daughter of Chief Red Elk. That name carried weight. Harlan had heard of Red Elk, the war chief who'd driven the cavalry out of Snake Valley 5 years back, and the only one who'd agreed to a fragile peace since. The last thing the captain wanted was another blood feud. So he nodded and stepped aside, though his eyes narrowed as Naily dismounted. "I've come to speak to the prisoner," she said. Her English was careful but strong, each word cutting through the murmurs around her. The soldiers exchanged looks, shifting uneasily. Harlan scoffed. "That man's no good for talking, miss. He's a killer." Her eyes didn't even flick toward him, and yet you keep him alive. Why? The captain hesitated, his jaw tightening. She walked past him before he could answer, her moccasins silent against the dirt, until she stood before the cage where Colt Maddox sat, his head still low. For the first time that day, the outlaw stirred. He lifted his face, and the crowd fell quiet. His eyes were cold gray, like storm clouds over dry land, and his smile came slow, a curl that looked too tired to be cruel, but too dangerous to be kind. "Well," he drawled, voice low and rough, "I must be dreamin'. Didn't think angels rode out this far." The crowd snickered nervously, but Naily didn't smile. "I am not your angel," she said. "I am Apache." He leaned forward, the chains clinking, studying her as though trying to read something written between her words. "Then you're something rarer," he said, his voice carrying a strange respect. They stared at each other, and for a heartbeat the fort seemed to hold its breath. She was not afraid, not even curious. She simply looked, as if weighing his soul on invisible scales. Then, without warning, she spoke again, and her words fell like thunder in the silence. "Please marry me." A hush spread through the soldiers. Someone dropped a tin cup. The sound rang out sharp as a gunshot. Colt blinked, then laughed once, softly. "You've got a cruel sense of humor, darlin'." Her gaze didn't waver. "I do not joke about life or death." The wind picked up, carrying the scent of dust and creosote. "You will hang soon. My people's law allows me to choose a husband freely. If I marry you, the fort cannot kill you without starting a war. They know this. My father will see to it." The murmurs around them grew tense, but she ignored them. "In return," she continued, You will live under my people's protection. A fair trade for a man with nothing left to lose. Colt studied her, the humor fading from his eyes. Lady, you don't even know me. I know enough, she said. You are feared by your own kind. So am I. That makes us equal. For the first time, something softened in his expression, a flicker of something dangerously close to respect. The captain stepped forward, furious. Enough of this, he's condemned. This talk ends now. But Naley turned to him and said, in a voice that carried through the fort, Then tomorrow you will hang my husband. And just like that, the wind stopped. Even the horses went still. The captain paled as the meaning hit him. Hanging Colt Maddox now would mean open war. Colt sat in silence, staring up at the woman who had just bound his fate to hers with nothing more than words. Around them whispers spread like wildfire. The soldiers didn't know if they'd just witnessed madness, or the start of something the whole desert would remember. As dusk fell, Naley mounted her horse and rode back toward the dying light. Colt watched her go, the chains at his wrists feeling suddenly lighter. He didn't understand her yet, but he knew one thing for certain. She'd changed the game. Somewhere beyond the fort walls, the coyotes began to sing, and the man they called the Coyote of Canyon Diablo smiled for the first time in a long while. The night came down heavy over Fort Henshaw, bringing with it the kind of quiet that only settles when everyone is afraid to speak. A lantern burned outside the cage, its weak flame throwing gold over Colt Maddox's face, carving the hard lines of a man who'd lived too long on borrowed time. The desert beyond the walls was black, endless, and alive with whispers. He leaned back against the bars, listening to the low hum of the wind through the wire, and thinking of the woman with obsidian eyes who had asked him to marry her in front of everyone. He'd had women before, gamblers' widows, saloon girls, and outlaws' daughters, but none had ever looked at him the way Naley did, like she saw something beyond the blood and dust. The idea of marriage almost made him laugh again. Him, a husband, it was absurd. Yet, beneath that absurdity, a sliver of something dangerous stirred, a thought that maybe this wasn't the end. Maybe that wild-eyed woman had thrown him a lifeline, even if it was woven from madness and war. He couldn't tell if he wanted to thank her or curse her name. Inside the captain's office, voices argued behind shuttered windows. Captain Harlan paced, his fists clenched. She's bluffing, he muttered. Some Apache trick. The sergeant shook his head. Sir, if we hang him now, Red Elk will take it as a declaration of war. The general won't like that. Harlan slammed his fist against the desk. So what do you suggest? Let the outlaw walk free because a woman speaks of marriage. Outside, a private murmured a prayer. Nobody wanted another raid. Nobody wanted to die for a man they all hated and feared. By dawn, the fort was restless. Rumors spread faster than fire through dry brush. Some said the Apache were already riding toward the valley. Others said Naley would return with a priest, and soldiers would be forced to watch the outlaw take a bride in chains. The absurdity of it gnawed at Harlan's pride, but the more he thought about the risk, the more he realized there was no winning this. Every man in the fort knew it too. Colt Maddox, murderer and thief, had somehow become their shield against war. When the gates creaked open that morning, she returned. Her horse's hooves struck the dirt in a steady rhythm, and the sun glinted off the silver beads in her hair. She carried no weapon, only a woven satchel slung over her shoulder. The men stepped aside as she dismounted, their eyes avoiding hers. She walked straight to the cage, her steps sure, her face unreadable. Colt met her gaze through the bars. You're a hell of a storm, darlin', he said. You sure know how to get a man's attention. Naley didn't smile. Are you ready to be free? He tilted his head, eyes narrowing. Depends what the price is. She reached into her satchel and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in hide. Inside was a simple band made of hammered silver, engraved with symbols he didn't understand. You marry me, she said softly. You live, the fort cannot touch you. My father will demand your release as my husband." Colt stared at the ring for a long moment before shaking his head. "And what do you get, besides a noose that talks back?" She met his gaze. "I get a weapon the soldiers fear." The words hit him harder than a bullet. She wasn't rescuing him out of kindness. She was recruiting him. He admired that. "You don't trust easy," he said. "Neither do I. Maybe that's something to build on." The captain stormed out then, red-faced, shouting, "This farce is over. There'll be no wedding in my fort." Naily turned to him, her voice steady and sharp. "Then the ground will drink blood before sunset." The threat hung heavy in the air, not as a boast but a promise. Harlan saw it in her eyes. She meant every word. With a resigned growl, he threw his hat down. "Fine, but don't think this makes him a free man. He steps 1 foot outside that gate. He's your problem." Naily nodded once. Colt smirked, rattling his chains. "Sounds like the start of a fine honeymoon." The men laughed nervously, but their laughter died as she knelt, unlocking the cage with the key she'd taken from Harlan's desk when he wasn't looking. The iron door groaned open, and Colt Maddox stepped out for the first time in weeks. The soldiers tensed, hands twitching near their rifles. He didn't look back. The ceremony was brief. A missionary stationed at the fort, pale and trembling, read from a weathered Bible while Naily and Colt stood in the dust. The ring slid onto his finger. Her hand didn't shake. When the preacher said the final words, Colt looked down at her, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. "Well, Mrs. Maddox," he said quietly, "you just made the worst trade of your life." "Maybe," she replied. "Or maybe the best." The wind carried her words across the yard like smoke, and the men knew they'd witnessed something they didn't understand. That night, as the fort slept uneasily, Colt sat outside the tent they'd given them, staring at the horizon. The chains were gone, but the weight on his shoulders felt heavier than before. Naily sat nearby, sharpening her knife, the firelight painting her face in gold and shadow. "You could have left me to hang," he said finally. "Why didn't you?" She looked at him without hesitation. "Because I need a man the world fears," she said, "and you need a reason to live." For once, Colt had no smart reply. The desert wind sighed, and somewhere far off, thunder rolled.